Despite ABC putting Jimmy Kimmel back on the air, ABC's two biggest station owners, Nexstar and Sinclair, are boycotting and refusing to air his show on their ABC stations.
Disney is bringing him back on the air tomorrow. ABC says in a statement that we made the decision last week to suspend production to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment. But now, after having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy, the ABC says we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday. So Kimmel's getting back to work.
Wow, Brian, that is significant, especially given that some of the players outside of Disney in a corporate setting, like Nexstar and Sinclair, they essentially have deals that allowed them to preempt his show, and that's part of the reason that it was suspended.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in other ABC news, young Jimmy Kimmel's coming back to television.
Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, and Seth Meyers are celebrating Jimmy Kimmel's return to TV. On September 22nd, the Walt Disney Company announced in a statement that after having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy, the decision was reached to bring back Jimmy Kimmel Live on Tuesday, following the show's suspension over comments the comedian made about the man accused of fatally shooting Charlie Kirk.
Do we know how they might react to this?
We don't, and that becomes the big question now. Will these local station affiliates choose to air Jimmy Kimmel Live, or will they continue to protest the comedian even though the network is bringing him back nationwide? ABC does gently chastise Kimmel in this statement. The statement says, quote, "The decision to suspend him, we made it because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive." So they're very gently saying they disagreed with Kimmel last week, but obviously they're bringing him back as of tomorrow.
Did y'all really think we weren't going to talk about Jimmy Kimmel?
I support Jimmy Kimmel.
Someone's got to step up. Enough. We're not going to bow.
I think Jimmy Kimmel's terrible. You know what suspended him? His talent. You know what else? His ratings.
Disney issued a surprise update this afternoon. Kimmel will be back on the air tomorrow night. The company said they suspended production last week to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country.
Late-night hosts who showed support for Kimmel last week, condemning ABC's decision to preempt the show, were happy to hear the latest update. Jon Stewart announced Kimmel's return in the beginning of his Daily Show monologue on Monday, leading to a roar of applause from the audience.
Meanwhile, in other ABC news, young Jimmy Kimmel's coming back to television.
Adding they thought some of Jimmy's comments were ill-timed and insensitive. This morning, before the news broke, The View broke its silence on the suspension drama.
No one silences us.
Both shows share the same network, ABC, and parent company, Disney.
The government cannot apply pressure to force someone to be silenced.
The numbers don't lie. Jimmy Kimmel just had his best ratings in years, pulling over 6.2 million viewers on his return episode. Yet nearly a quarter of ABC's audience, 25% to be exact, never saw it. Why? Because Nexstar and Sinclair, two of the largest broadcast owners in America, are still boycotting his show. It's an extraordinary standoff. Disney says the show is back, but nearly 70 markets are blocking it, leaving millions of viewers in the dark. This didn't happen in a vacuum. Just look at the timeline. September 15th, Kimmel's controversial monologue about Charlie Kirk's death goes viral overnight, racking up 1.5 million views before dawn. September 17th, the FCC's Brendan Carr hints at regulatory consequences for companies that keep airing Kimmel. And by that afternoon, Nexstar and Sinclair both issue statements preempting his show. That's a 6-hour chain reaction that took one of the biggest names in late-night television off the air in a quarter of the country. And here's what most people miss. This isn't about ratings. In fact, the ratings prove Kimmel still has pulling power. This is about leverage. Nexstar is fighting for FCC approval on a $6.2 billion merger. Sinclair is angling to avoid fresh scrutiny. Both chose to sacrifice editorial independence in order to protect billion-dollar deals.
Earlier, the ACLU announced 400 celebrities, including Jennifer Aniston, Tom Hanks, and Meryl Streep, had signed an open letter condemning Kimmel's suspension.
This morning, I'm canceling my Disney Plus. I'm trying to say with the pocketbook that I do not support what they're doing with Jimmy.
I just canceled my Disney Plus and Hulu subscriptions.
ET has learned that Jimmy's staff members did not have to be in the office today, but were already being paid for the week.
It would be very hard to go back when your parent company does you the way that they just did Jimmy.
And the ripple effects are massive. Advertisers pulling spots, stock prices dipping, and free speech groups warning about dangerous precedents. What we're watching isn't just a feud between a host and his critics, it's a collision of politics, profit, and press freedom that could reshape television for years to come. On September 15th, 2025, Jimmy Kimmel walked onto his stage like it was any other night. But what came out of his mouth over the next 12 minutes turned into the most controversial monologue of his career. Just 4 days after the shocking assassination of Charlie Kirk, the nation was raw with grief. Kimmel acknowledged the tragedy, but then pivoted sharply, calling out what he saw as political grandstanding. And then came the line that changed everything, comparing public mourning to the way a child reacts when a goldfish dies. Inside the studio, the reaction was split. Half the crowd erupted in applause, while the other half sat frozen. But the real impact wasn't in the theater. By the next morning, clips of Kimmel's words had racked up over 1.5 million views on X, turning his late-night stage into a digital battlefield. Supporters praised his bluntness, critics accused him of mocking the dead, and almost instantly, the hashtags told the story. Hashtag cancel Kimmel climbing the charts, and the counter-movement hashtag free speech rising in response. That night's monologue wasn't just comedy. It was a spark thrown into an environment already primed for outrage. And what came next proved that this wasn't just about jokes anymore. It was about power. The backlash wasn't just online noise. Within 48 hours, it reached the halls of Washington. On September 17th, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr made an appearance on a conservative podcast, and his words changed the tone of the entire debate. He didn't just criticize Kimmel, he warned that networks and affiliates might face additional work from the FCC if they didn't take action. To anyone in broadcasting, that was code. It meant licenses, approvals, and billion-dollar deals were suddenly at risk.
Over the weekend, Jimmy's cousin Sal, a writer and performer on the show, teased more drama ahead.
There are a couple bombshells still there. Everything's going to be just fine.
The president, meanwhile, has been on an anti-Kimmel media blitz. At the White House,
he was terrible.
On Air Force One,
he's got no talent, and he's got no ratings.
And at yesterday's memorial for Charlie Kirk.
The same commentators who this week are screaming fascism were implying that Charlie Kirk deserved what happened to him.
He didn't say anything that nobody else didn't say. I think he'll be back on the air.
This wasn't the first time regulators leaned on media. Only months earlier, CBS parent company Paramount paid a $16 million settlement, just as Colbert's show was canceled ahead of a merger with Skydance. Days later, the FCC approved the $8 billion deal. For insiders, the pattern was clear: play ball with the government or face obstacles. For Kimmel, this meant his monologue wasn't just controversial, it had become a regulatory flashpoint. The FCC's warning gave cover to companies already nervous about advertiser pressure, and it set the stage for the fastest corporate blackout in recent television history. What happened next was corporate panic in real time. Within 6 hours of the FCC's warning, Nexstar, the largest owner of ABC affiliates in the country, announced it would no longer air Jimmy Kimmel's show. CEO Perry Sook oversees a $13 billion empire of nearly 200 stations, including 32 ABC affiliates. And with a $6.2 billion merger with Tegna waiting on FCC approval, the calculation was obvious. Silence Kimmel, protect the deal. Minutes later, Sinclair followed. CEO Christopher Ripley didn't just pull the program, he escalated, demanding that Kimmel issue a public apology and donate to Charlie Kirk's family and Turning Point USA. That move blacked out Kimmel in 70 major markets, erasing about a quarter of ABC's broadcast reach overnight. The scale was unprecedented. Nashville, New Orleans, Fresno, Mobile. In all of these cities, late-night comedy vanished and was replaced by news reruns. One host's monologue had triggered the biggest coordinated blackout in modern TV history. And for Disney, it was no longer just a programming issue. It had become a corporate crisis. The blackout didn't play out the way Nexstar and Sinclair expected. In the affected markets, local news ratings jumped 15% overnight as anchors filled the gap with extended coverage and tributes. Advertisers, though, weren't celebrating.
And we don't know, obviously, all of the considerations that went into this, Brian. But I would say leaders, obviously, at ABC and Disney have had the benefit of a few days of feedback.
Yes. Including from Disney employees who were very disturbed, including from Hollywood stars and showrunners, the kind of people Disney wants to work with, and from free speech groups, politicians, even some Republican politicians like Ted Cruz. We know the condemnation of Disney has been widespread.
Within 48 hours, major brands like Gallo pulled their spots, creating $5 million in immediate revenue losses. Investors took notice too. Nexstar's stock dipped 1.2%. Sinclair slipped 0.8%, signaling Wall Street's nerves about advertiser boycotts and public backlash. And then came the twist. When Disney put Kimmel back on the air nationally, his return drew over 6.3 million viewers, his biggest audience in a decade. The 18 to 49 demo rating hit 0.87, proving the controversy hadn't silenced him at all. It had amplified him. While affiliates were losing ad dollars and scrambling to explain programming changes, Kimmel was pulling some of the strongest numbers in late-night television. Instead of shrinking his audience, the blackout highlighted the gap between corporate risk management and public demand. And it showed that silencing one voice can sometimes make it even louder. Charlie Kirk's death had already shaken the country, but the response to Kimmel's joke showed how quickly grief can be turned into a weapon. Conservative commentators framed his remarks not as satire, but as a personal attack on Kirk's widow and family. Influencers branded it dancing on a grave, pushing hashtags that climbed into the hundreds of thousands of posts. Turning Point USA allies amplified the outrage, arguing that Hollywood voices like Kimmel had created the conditions for hostility against conservatives. The facts told a different story. The shooter was a former TPUSA volunteer radicalized by far-right ideology. But the narrative was reshaped almost overnight. On Fox News and across X, the line of attack was clear: blame liberal media. Kirk's widow became a central figure. Her appearances on primetime shows were emotional and deeply sympathetic, but her grief was quickly politicized. Calls for Kimmel to be canceled weren't just about offense, they were presented as defending a family in mourning. For affiliates, this created even more pressure. Airing Kimmel now looked like choosing sides in a cultural war. The conversation had moved beyond comedy. It was no longer about whether a joke went too far.
The comedian then poked fun at the boycott campaign against Disney.
I want to say this seriously. That campaign that you all launched, pretending that you were going to cancel Hulu, while secretly racing through 4 seasons of Only Murders in the Building, really worked. Congratulations. Wasn't it interesting to try and figure out all the tentacles Disney has in your daily life? It's one thing to swear off cruises, but the Avengers? Nah.
But about who controlled the story of Kirk's legacy and who had the right to comment at all. Disney and ABC suddenly found themselves caught between two fires. On one side, affiliates were pulling Kimmel off the air to protect billion-dollar mergers. On the other, critics accused the network of abandoning free speech by not defending its own host. The pressure escalated quickly. More than 100 former ABC journalists signed an open letter to CEO Bob Iger, warning that the blackout set a dangerous precedent for political censorship. Civil liberties groups like the ACLU and FIRE issued statements condemning the decision, calling it a chilling moment for broadcast independence. Even billionaire Mark Cuban weighed in, warning that blackouts like this would only push viewers faster towards streaming and away from traditional TV. Meanwhile, Disney's own investors weren't staying quiet. Shareholders began demanding internal records on how the Kimmel suspension had been handled, suspecting that corporate decisions had been influenced by government pressure rather than pure business logic. The debate was no longer just cultural. It was financial, legal, and reputational. Disney had reinstated Kimmel, but Nexstar and Sinclair's refusal to air his show left nearly a quarter of ABC households in blackout. The standoff revealed a core truth about modern media. Editorial independence is fragile when tied directly to regulatory approval and Wall Street expectations. When you look at the full timeline, one thing becomes clear. This was never just about Jimmy Kimmel. A single monologue on September 15th turned into regulatory threats, a corporate blackout, investor panic, and the largest free speech debate television has seen in years. Nexstar and Sinclair protected their billion-dollar deals, but in doing so, they exposed just how fragile broadcast independence has become. The irony is impossible to ignore. By trying to silence him, Kimmel ended up with his strongest ratings in a decade, millions more tuning in to see what he would say next. The affiliates may have cut him from 70 markets, but his audience grew louder online and on streaming platforms where blackouts mean nothing. The very act of pulling him off the air only magnified his reach. For viewers, the question now isn't whether one joke crossed the line. It's about who decides what Americans are allowed to hear. Corporate boards worried about mergers, government regulators hinting at consequences, or audiences themselves. In 2025, the answer looks less certain than ever. And that's the real corner Kimmel forced Nexstar and Sinclair into. Not just the choice of airing or not airing a late-night show, but the choice between short-term corporate safety and the long-term principle of free speech. The fallout has already reshaped the media landscape, and the next move will determine how much freedom is left on America's airwaves.